Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the monthly roundtable discussion of Council for Strategic Affairs. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and I'm the president of Council for Strategic Affairs. So those of you who registered for our session probably saw this flyer. Today is Saturday, February 14, 2026. It's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's around 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. The topic for today's discussion is US hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. We have four distinguished panelists, Mr. Terry Milewski from Canada, Professor Anup Kumar from USA, Professor Amalendu Misra from UK, and Dr. Mark Kirton from Trinidad and Tobago. We are currently having some difficulty contacting two of our panelists, but we will go on. Just to show you, this is the entire world, and this is supposedly the Western Hemisphere. Couple of issues about the Council for Strategic Affairs. Council imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. Council condemns terrorism in all forms worldwide. CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. CSA promotes people-to-people contact and track-to diplomacy. Those of our viewers who are based in US, for them, we are registered as a 501c3 organization with the IRS. So please donate and support CSA, and also subscribe, share, and like CSA YouTube channel. We have monthly roundtable discussion, usually on second Saturday of each month, a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on fourth Saturday of each month. There's another feature called Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee, a one-on-one interview. We do organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publication of articles on geopolitics and international relations. We have a fellowship training program in strategic studies. So those are the activities we have. So I'll give a few words about our panelist. Terry is a journalist who has worked in 50 countries during 38 years with the CBC. He was CBC's first Middle East bureau chief. He spent 8 years in Washington during Reagan, Bush, and Clinton administrations. He was based in Vancouver for 14 years before returning to Ottawa as senior correspondent. Our next distinguished panelist is Professor Anup Kumar. He has a PhD from University of Iowa. He is Professor of Communications at Levin College of Public Affairs and Education at Cleveland State University. Before joining academia, Professor Anup Kumar was a professional journalist. So we have two journalists actually meeting on this platform. Professor Kumar has expertise in political communication, populist politics, and peace communications. He has published numerous research articles on the interaction of media and politics in India, US, Egypt. He's author of Making of Small State, published in 2014. And I'll go back to Terry that he has also published several books, including one on Khalistan. So I will not introduce the other two panelists who have not joined yet. Again, this is the Western Hemisphere. What is Western Hemisphere? Western Hemisphere generally starts at prime meridian 0-degree longitude and ends at 180 meridian, which encompasses all of the Americas, part of Europe, part of America, Antarctica, plus most of Atlantic and half of the Pacific. So that is the large section, but generally the word focuses on Americas or the so-called New World. And if you look at the Western Hemisphere, these are all the countries, and on top you see the Greenland that is being coveted right now. So, talking about US hegemony in Western Hemisphere, there is no doubt that there's breakdown of the traditional post-World War II international order. For last 1.5 years, we are talking about Donroe Doctrine. I have labeled and enumerated number of issues, and I don't want to actually second guess my panelists, but yes, the administration in US is talking about Western Hemisphere being the sphere of influence for United States of America. And that actually raises number of issues. So before I bring our panelists, some housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not interrupt our esteemed panelists. Only those members of audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. All questions are moderated through chat room. Please be very precise in asking a question. Don't send lengthy comments in form of a monologue. This program is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on our YouTube channel. It will be available in future on our website. Again, CSA is registered as a 501c3 organization with the Internal Revenue Service in the US. Please donate and support the CSA. The link is on our website. So that is my introduction to this topic. And without further ado, I'm going to invite our first panelist, Mr. Terry Milewski, to give his comments, and maybe he will give his opening statement for 7 minutes or so, followed by the second distinguished panelist. The other two are not available, so we will see. We will get some from the audience, some comments from the audience. They are very distinguished people in the audience. So Terry, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for arranging this and for the kind introduction. Welcome to my fellow panelists, singular, and maybe they'll be plural within a few minutes. 7 minutes isn't much, although it's more than I was used to as a TV correspondent, where they give you 2.5, and if you go 2:34, you're in trouble, and they cut you off. So I'm going to go straight to it. We're settling down today to discuss an issue that we're discussing something that nobody wants, even though they've had it all their lives and have done pretty well with it too. And what I'm referring to, of course, is the Pax Americana, which ever since our fathers came home from the war in 1945, gave Europeans and many other people a big brother, a nuclear umbrella under the American umbrella, an example of a kind of democracy and capitalism in action, along with all the other stuff, rock and roll, hot dogs, and Marilyn Monroe. But all of that seems like really ancient history now, doesn't it? So much so, in fact, that when I first looked at the topic for today, I said, wait, American hegemony in Europe? Do we still have that? Because it really seemed to many of us that went out with the trash in Davos 3 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We can talk about that perhaps later. Anyway, it turns out that that's a bit of an exaggeration. The Americans have not entirely given up being your friendly local hegemon. And I think it's fair to note, before we wave goodbye to them, that they didn't overdo it. They weren't too bad as conquistadors and imperialists. They didn't burn the place down, and they didn't try to enslave everybody. So for 80 years, in fact, since the Second World War, Europe had a kind of, you might call it a hegemony light. The Americans, they weren't really imperialists on the conquistador model, put everyone to the sword. One exception I might make is I was going to point out that, to some degree, the Americans didn't try to interfere in everyone's politics. And then I thought, oops, Latin America, that's a different story, isn't it? But we're talking about Europe here, and we were told to stick to the topic. So, fair enough. fact of the matter is that for all those 8 decades, the NATO alliance did work. It kept the Russians out, at bay at least. It was a good deal for Europe and for the United States. And I would say American allies in Europe and Canada and Australia, they all knew that even hegemony light, as I call it, came at a price. And they paid it by standing with the Americans shoulder to shoulder when it counted. And in turn, the Americans knew that their loyal allies would volunteer, yes, volunteer, to fight and die alongside the Americans shoulder to shoulder when the call came, which of course it did in Afghanistan, for example, for the Danes, for the Poles, for the British, for the Canadians. Who endured some of the worst of the fighting in Afghanistan. Now, you got to wonder, haven't you? Would they pay that price today, do you think, for Donald Trump? I think it's a good question. For myself, I would say that as a British-born Canadian who spent 8 years covering the White House back in the day and married an American, I hope you will believe me when I say that I have never seen more disgust with an American president than when Donald Trump returned from Davos and went over to Fox News and sneered at the Allied soldiers who died for the USA in Afghanistan. For millions of us, I mention this because for millions of us, including myself, on both sides of the Atlantic, that was the essential moment when we realized that there was no coming back from this. Remember that Trump at the time was already flailing, trying to wriggle out of his insane plan to invade a small, peaceful, democratic NATO ally, didn't he? And for no good reason. We all watched that. We knew that this was not the man, to put it mildly, to revive American leadership in the world, including Europe. We knew the bell was tolling for those 80 years of looking up to the United States. Now we were looking down as Trump hit rock bottom. And I'll remind you that it was just 3 weeks ago, on January the 23rd, when he said at Fox News, "We don't need NATO, they do nothing for us." And then he said of those fallen soldiers, I wrote down the quote, "They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines." So, never mind that he was lying. Of course he was. I mean, you'd be shocked if he was not. But another thing, by the way, those soldiers wouldn't be dead if they had stayed out of danger, right? So we knew he was lying. But really, when a draft-dodging president goes on TV to spit on the graves of his best friends who died for the US, we know that American credibility in Europe, certainly, and everywhere else, is circling the drain. And that from here on, I think it's got 3 more years. It'll continue, but it'll be a soap opera. Trump lashes out. Trump stuffs his pockets with booty. Trump tries to abolish impeachment. It'll be an entertainment. And nothing will seem too outlandish after what we've already seen. I mean, soon, no doubt, he's going to sell out Ukraine. He's going to make Russia great again. Taiwan will be next to go on the block. It'll be a great deal. And so on. But I think Trump has something more in mind than just reviving the hegemony of the past. He's looking for something grander, something more gaudy, I think. And I think that after exactly this year, exactly 250 years after the American, 13 colonies revolted to throw off a European king, it's got to occur to Trump, well, why not try an American one? And you may not be with me on this. You may think I'm going too far, but the process is already underway, by the way. Already more and more US government property is being deemed to be somehow Trump's property. So the East Wing is going to be the Trump ballroom, etc. Notice also at the same time that Trump never talks about US relations with other countries. It's always, my relations with Putin are great, or I get along great with Xi Jinping. And it sounds to me very much like soon we're going to be seeing him selling baseball caps for the midterm elections. And they'll have a Louis XIV slogan on them. And it'll say, L'État, c'est moi. Ho, ho, ho. The state is me. The state is me. L'État, c'est moi. And again, you'll think I'm joking, but it's begun already. The East Wing is gone. The Kennedy Center is next. And on. The merger and acquisition of the state and its boss is afoot already. Already is another one. The Sheikh, you'll remember, gave that new jumbo jet to the president, not to the United States. What about the Swiss? They wanted lower tariffs, didn't they? So they tipped the president with a gold bar. They didn't tip the American taxpayer who actually could use it. So in the end, what I'm suggesting is that hegemony may not be the word we need going forward. Perhaps we need a word that better describes rule by one man. Yes, monarchy. That would do it. 250 years after the revolt in 1776 and the rejection of the English king, Americans, I put to you, might soon see painted golden chubby cherubs stuck to the dull gray walls of NATO headquarters. Well, they can use a redecoration. And that'll be just like the Oval Office. It'll look like the Oval Office. And Trump will perhaps pose for his portrait in a crown and holding a scepter, just like Louis XIV, only bigger, of course. I'll leave it there. You get my drift. And we can kick it around later, and you tell her, Terry, you're exaggerating. And I say, okay, you want to bet? And we'll have a bet. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Terry. Now it's my honor and privilege to invite Professor Anup Kumar, who will give his opening statement for 6 to 7 minutes. Professor Anup Kumar, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Adityanjee, for the invitation. Hello, Terry. And I'll not repeat what Terry has said. I'm in agreement with a lot of what Terry has said, so I'll just take it from there. The way we want to understand the topic, the US hegemony and Western Hemisphere, to understand that what's happening and how US hegemony, does it even exist, which Terry concluded is that most probably we are not even looking at US hegemony anymore. And to understand that, we have to think about that, what exactly is hegemony? Hegemony is, generally we as academics generally call it dominance without coercion. That's what hegemony is primarily. And the US hegemony was based on benevolent US leadership around the world and in alliance with the Western powers. That's how it was understood. It doesn't mean that coercion was not used. Coercion was used in non-West mostly, so it didn't matter. So the US hegemony was in alliance with the Western hegemony. That's why it was also sometimes called Western hegemony. Now what has happened is, and this is what Mr. Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, in his speech highlighted, this was the focus of his speech, that we were part of that US hegemony and now we are not. We have just been told that this US hegemony does not include the entire West. And to some extent, it's not even a hegemony. It is actually coercive dominance. And coercive dominance was the old order before the Second World War. You are powerful, the country that is powerful would use their coercive powers to dominate others. And this goes back to colonial period, this goes back throughout history. That's how historical empires were constructed. Historically, empires were constructed on coercion. And it is after the Second World War we started seeing this new kind of empire. Sometimes it's people do talk about that Pax Britannica was also some sort of an hegemony. And before that, Pax Romana, going back to ancient history. So the idea here is this, that the US under President Trump and his administration has chosen not to go the hegemonic route. It wants to go back to the old route, which is coercion, dominance with coercion. And also, when you start thinking of coercive power in dominating the world, you cannot dominate the entire world. So you have to, by choice, choose spheres of influence. So the only way coercive dominance could have been practiced was retreat. And that retreat has happened to Western Hemisphere, which includes North and South America and the Caribbean islands, Pacific islands. So it is that territory that we are talking about. And here, there is what we are seeing is that the US coercive dominance in this region is very clearly described in the National Security Strategy of December 2025. NSS is something which every new administration has to come up with. This is by law in the United States. They have to produce an NSS, National Security Strategy document, and give it to the Congress. And so in December, President Trump's administration did that. And to understand what that the entire approach that the United States has under President Trump, we have to read that document. It's not, doesn't even hide it. It makes it very clear what the thinking is. The thinking is this, that rise of China-Russia axis as peer competitor. Now remember, before that, after the end of Cold War in 1989, suddenly US was the only superpower left. So there were no peer competitors. But with China-Russia axis post-Ukraine invasion in Ukraine, we have a situation where US, President Trump, under the President Trump's administration, US thinks that they are now almost like, we are returning to great power competition, what John Mashama has often talked about. And so we have to return to spheres of influence. And the United States, in its NSS document, made it very clear our sphere of influence is Western Hemisphere, which is North America, South America, and the Caribbean territory, Atlantic territory, and Pacific Island territories. And so if we think about it, that if we go back to the hegemonic model, US hegemony, which was based on a phenomena which you could only understand by a prefix globalization. So the rules-based world order in which was the hegemonic ideology. Under that, US hegemony was accepted. US was the leader of the Western nations. Global capitalism was the norm. So free flow of capital. In return, there would be some free flow of labor, that was migration of workers from the developing countries to the West. And that's how the migration regimes were opened. And then you have environmental crisis, environmentalism, that was part of that hegemonic regime, and human rights, global human rights regime. So if you think of it, the rules-based order or the liberal order consisted all these things. Now, what does the national security strategy of the United States do to that order? It rejects all of it. It rejects the global capitalism, which rested on WTO. It rejects migration of not only capital, but labor, especially where talent moved from one part of the world to the other part of the world in search of, best opportunities. And that plugged in the developing world, countries like India, China, and other countries into the Western system, because the talent from there, what they called it brain drain, whereas US called it search for talent or a global talent, that moved around. Environmental principles on which the West acknowledged that for 200 years, Western industrialization had damaged the environment, so they have a greater responsibility, and the developing world had we'll have to help the developing world manage the global climate change. In some sense, we'll have to subsidize their transition of their economy from polluting economy to a much more mitigating the crisis around that. So all that, and human rights was another part of it, which we have to encourage more human rights, global human rights, and that was so. None of this is the concern of this national security strategy. If you go read it closely, that's not what it's about. It is about, if you think, as I said, it's 19th century. It is a coercive dominance of your own sphere of influence, and we saw that whole chapter was opened with what happened in Venezuela. So that was. It doesn't mean that US didn't use coercive dominance previously. Under Reagan, it was used massively, coercive dominance. Coercive dominance is used in Middle East forever. There's no hegemony in Middle East, or US hegemony never has been. It is basically a coercive dominance over there. US military power is central to it in alliance with Israel. And so, and with Saudi Arabia, obviously, and UAE. So there is this system which has been shaken at its root. Now, what system comes out of it? Nobody knows. Because we have to see one thing, we have to understand it doesn't happen that if Donald Trump, President Trump's regime, government, or the Republican Party is voted out of power in 2028 and Democrats come to power, it doesn't go back. The reset doesn't happen usually. That's our experience. When President Reagan had last time returned to coercive dominance, we didn't see that return when Democrats came to power. It was the same system with some fixes in the margins, especially on human rights issues and on certain liberal principles. But resetting to exactly how it was in, let's say, 2022 or 20, even before that, will not happen. So we have, in some sense, we have to think about international relations, strategic affairs from this new perspective. And NSS December 2025 is the founding document for it.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Anup Kumar, for a very cogent, clear, and compelling opening statement. As I said, that two of our panelists are not available, so I'm going to invite somebody from the audience, and that is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, who has a vast, almost 4 decades of diplomatic experience working for Indian Foreign Services, IFS. He is also a member of the International Advisory Board of the Council for Strategic Affairs, and he has taught at George Washington University at Elliott Center. He's a prolific author, has written books, and a political commentator on geopolitics and international relations. So, Ambassador Kapoor, kindly give your opening statement for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adityanjee. It has been such a pleasure to listen to both the previous speakers, Terry and Anup. Such profound insights and laced with, sarcastic humor in one case also, which was quite amazing. So when I look at the world scenario today and the US role in that scenario, I am, quite surprised at the way it is going, in the sense that if I were just to analyze it from the perspective of where was US earlier, where is it now, and where is it going, and where should it be going? It is quite a difficult situation that it is in. It was like setting the rules for the rules-based order in a big way. The dollar was dominating the world economy. The SWIFT system of trade was controlling the global trade financial exchanges. The Western world was defining the narrative, global narrative, to a great extent. in terms of the collaboration between the US and European Union and the NATO powers as such. And then the US tried to express its zone of interest as being the whole of the Western Hemisphere, the North America, South America, etc., under the Monroe Doctrine, which is now called the Donroe from Donald Trump. And after World War II, what we had seen was that after the nuclear bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they had sort of gained more and more power and assumed more and more authority over different parts of the world. They had tried to revive the Western European countries under the Marshall Plan. So there was a mix of benevolence and, of course, control and a lot of interventions which we saw through the years, through the decades, and which I also personally worked in many of those countries where the US had intervened and created a lot of negative impacts and results, outcomes thereafter, such as Cambodia, such as Chile, where I was ambassador in both these countries. So it kept on evolving from that to a point where today a lot of the world is started to question the very basis of the US control. In the sense that after 1971, when the gold standard was removed and the dollar had become the benchmark, today the debt of the US is in tens of trillions. It's over 38 trillion already. It's increasing by leaps and bounds. It's something which is in the knowledge of the entire world. Earlier, with the lack of internet and lack of social media, people were not very aware of what was happening and how the world economy was being controlled or managed by the deep state, also partly by, and how it was being influenced. A lot of the decisions were being influenced by the military industrial complex in the US in particular. So what was also interesting was to see how the threat perceptions of the world were being tackled by various entities, including the US, in terms of the terrorism, in terms of jihadi Islam, in terms of the rise of China, in terms of wokeism. And today what we see is there are new paradigms of diplomacy. Everything pre, 2024, 2025 has been thrown to the winds. There's a new language, there's a new way of dealing with nations, there's a new way of coercive diplomacy through tariffs and through various other means. Interventions have taken place through CIA and through other efforts. Earlier, we've seen that in Iraq, we've seen that in Libya, we've seen that in dozens of other cases. But now it's become even more blatant in the sense that I am going to do this and I will do this and I am doing this. So might has probably become the defining principle as a rule rather than any other consideration. And we have to see now how the world moves from here, because after the recent sort of challenges to the US, template for sort of browbeating their partners, the Western world, Canada, West Europe, you see now some of the countries have reacted very negatively to that, including Germany, including Canada, and others are also starting to react, including France, including Italy, including England, UK, in a muted way, which were traditionally very strong partners. So how this is going to shape the future of the world, how China is going to, take a stance in terms of what the US is doing, in terms of its military prowess, in terms of what the Thucydides principle states, in terms of the existing hegemon and the rising hegemon, in terms of Taiwan, how the Russia-Ukraine war is going to shape out and move ahead from here. How Russia is going to react to this also is going to be an interesting point. And for the US in particular, what I'm waiting to see is whether they can bring back the world sort of to an even keel, or continue to rock the boat so much that they do not have any control on it thereafter? And whether even relations with friendly countries like India, because I remember when Trump was contesting the elections, his maximum popularity amongst various countries of the world was in India. That has also plummeted very significantly. So, how the India-US relations are going to shape up, and how the future is going to unfold, because a lot of the world bodies like the UN, etc., are being completely sidelined by Board of Peace. So, too many things have taken place in the last year or so, which has completely changed the tone and tenor of the conduct of diplomacy, of negotiations, of what we knew it as diplomacy in the past, and what we studied so assiduously and conducted so professionally all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. With all the three panelists giving their opening statements, we'll go to the second phase of the roundtable discussion, which is moderated discussion. And I'll ask each of the panelists one question each. I'll start with Terry because he started first. Terry, I'm going to come to the basics. Do you ever visualize either Canada or the province of Alberta becoming the 51st state in your lifetime?
I won't bet against it, is my depressing answer. The polls do not support those who say, they're champing at the bit to separate from Canada, those Albertans. Even in Alberta, they have not assembled a majority in favor of the separation of Alberta from Canada, which would presumably be followed by some sort of association or annexation by the United States. Nationally, the best you can get is maybe 20% who are interested in a soft, say yes to a soft question. Because would you entertain a discussion on that? Would it be a good debate to have? Well, yeah, it might be fun, but it doesn't mean that you really believe in separation by Alberta. So I don't think there's a majority even in Alberta for the separation of Alberta, which I think would inevitably lead to absorption, shall we call it, by the United States. And I'm sure there's no majority in the country at large. And remember, there are many, many ties. It's not as though Alberta is some sort of island. It's not like Greenland, off the coast somewhere. Oh, let's pick that and nobody will notice. Far from it. I mean, Mark Carney grew up there, playing ice hockey in northern Alberta. He was the goalie. And I don't see a future. I used to work there. I lived there. Well, this is years ago, but at a similar period of anxiety over the question that you put to me, because of the so-called national energy program introduced by the first Prime Minister Trudeau, which was taken by rock-ribbed Albertans to mean a sort of expropriation of Alberta's extremely valuable assets in oil and gas. Well, guess what? Alberta is already exploiting today and every day its God-given oil and gas. They don't have to be separate in order to do that. And that's the big flaw in the argument that's being presented. And Albertans do get it. Okay, your Albertan cartoon character may appear on American television in a cowboy hat and cowboy boots. And that's, hey, this guy looks like an American, like a Texan. And he will say, it's an outrage that those socialists in Ottawa are expropriating our resources and we've got to... They're not expropriating their resources. The Carney government would love to exploit those, build pipelines to the west, and would love to exploit those resources to the max. I don't mean Trump style, whereby global warming is dismissed as a hoax. And I'm quoting, he calls it a hoax. It doesn't happen. It's not getting warmer. The hell with it. So I think all the signs saying that if I bet on an eventual, did you say in my lifetime? Was that the question?
Yes.
I don't know how long I've got, but I don't think I have long enough for Alberta to separate from Canada or from Canada to become the 51st state. I mean, there are hideously, deadly, difficult obstacles in path. That has defined almost the American-Canadian relationships, I'm sad to say, ever since Trump appeared on the scene. This 51st state nonsense. And for him, it's all a lot of fun. But the practical obstacles I mean, you don't have long enough. I'll just say that working those out would exhaust my lifetime and all of our lifetimes. We might never get there to figure out, well, how would that actually work? And I think the short answer, my answer is, it would not work.
Thank you, Terry. Next question goes to Professor Anup Kumar. And I think it is basically a segue from Terry's response. Professor Kumar, you talked about differentiation between benevolent hegemony and coercive dominant. But there's something that I would like to introduce, and that is imperialist expansionism. Look at the history. A country starting with 13 colonies has 50 states, 8 or 9 overseas colonies or so-called overseas dependent territories, including Puerto Rico. We are witness to the new maps of United States that include Canada, that include Greenland, that include entire South America. Shall we talk about the Treaty of Guadalupe? You have an expansionist, imperialistic country that is showing its true color now. And you use polite words like coercive dominance. Venezuela's de facto president, who is that? Gulf of Mexico becomes Gulf of America. We would block the oil supplies to Cuba. I might become your next president. We will send special operation forces into Mexico. We would not allow Canada to open the new bridge. Let's call spade a spade. Any response?
Yeah, sure. So when I said that the US has, under President Trump, returned to coercive dominance, I reminded that this reminds you of 19th century. And what I was trying to allude to by saying 19th century is empire building. So 19th century, Russia expanded all across the world. Similarly, US expanded. They expanded their territory, and all these, from when you talk about original 13 colonies to this United States that we have, they had the war with Spain, they had the war with Spain, Mexico. That's the time when Cuba was brought under its influence. That's the time that they went right up to Philippines to take that Philippines under themselves. So this is what happens when coercive dominance is a framework of empire. It is not a framework of the framework of the alternative framework of empires, which are softer and benevolent, is hegemony. And that's how hegemonies are constructed. If we go back to British Pax Britannia, Pax Britannia was partially constructed under hegemony, initially founded with coercion, but then it was constructed under a hegemony around the world. And so, in many ways, what we are talking about is under President Trump, is he's saying that, you all are part of American empire. Cuba, you're part of American empire. Venezuela, you're part of America. Canada, you're part of American empire. The telling, as I said, I alluded to Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos. Prime Minister Carney in his speech was saying, hey, we were fine as long as we were part of that empire's core. You just threw us out of that core to the periphery. You see, all empires have these cores and periphery, and Western Alliance was the core, and Canada was part of that core. And so what happened is that when US said, well, you are also on the periphery like every other nation uh, around the world. So that is what happened when we think of coercive dominance. So that he realized, he said, the sign needs to be removed from the window. He was talking about Václav Havel's essay.
Yeah.
And in that, he was trying to draw our attention to this distinction between hegemony and coercive dominance. And the idea around is hegemony. Hegemony is often what happens. We think of coercive dominance as not really distinguishing it from hegemony. We have to distinguish it because no nations are built without hegemony, especially multi-ethnic nations. India has a hegemonic system. That's how you believe in the ideology of nation. You believe in the ideology. That's how you keep everybody together. US was similarly like that. It kept entire Western Alliance together by saying that when we will use coercion that Ambassador Kapoor talked about in Iraq and other places, with those interventions, we'll not do it in the West. We'll do it in the other parts of the world. You are a part of the center. So this is like, and anybody who is part of the center, and this was not an ethnicity-based idea. This was purely a territory ideology-based idea. So if you are a citizen of the United States from anywhere in the world, you're part of that center. And you are part of that empire, that hegemonic order that you're building. So, which should remind you of which goes back in history to Romans. Romans had this notion. Citizen of Rome could be a Middle Eastern. It doesn't matter. Once you are a citizen of Rome, you're part of the Roman hegemony. And so this is, when we think of coercive dominance is an empire system where coercion is used, and Cuba is part of it, and Venezuela is part of it, Central America is part of it. And we saw some of it during President Reagan's time when he did all those Grenada invasion, Panama. We saw it even then. But it wasn't, why is it so aggravating and so visceral under President Trump? Because President Trump's approach is very personalized, which Terry has talked about. It's everything about him. So everything needs to be identified with him. So President Trump's personalized approach to empire, not institutional approach. So what would happen after, when I said that it won't get reset, what would happen after President Trump is it will become an institutional system. It won't be personalized like it is now. The only difference, that's what will happen. This is my understanding of history. That's how it happens in history. And so what we are going to see is that the old order, the liberal world order or hegemonic order that was created, as I said, on those global principles, environmentalism, global human rights, global trade, WTO, global movement of labor. I always point out, very important, it is central part of it, global movement of labor. Because look at the policies on immigration and all that. That is also part of the disruptive model that he has. Because initially at WTO, developing countries had negotiated this. We'll allow you to invest capital, but you will allow a labor movement. That was the deal under GATT. And so that deal has also gone. So this is the system that we are witnessing.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. You have amply elaborated on your point. Terry wants to join in. Terry, just a brief.
Thank you. I admire that. It's a very lucid exposition of the precarious position that we're in. However, this philosophy that might makes right, which was adopted most prominently very recently, you probably saw the clip on the lawn of the White House with an interview between CNN anchor Jake Tapper and Stephen Miller, Trump's prime minister, supposedly. Anyway, he's the Svengali and behind the curtain who's pulling the strings, allegedly, and telling Trump what to think. And he delivered this little speech about the necessity to return to a world which is dominated by force and power. And he was just salivating with the prospect. It was a grim scene. And a few people have forgotten that soundbite as an indication of where we might be going on the questions that you just raised. However, I would just like to add one thing, and that is that even in extremis, even with American troops at the Canadian border, seeking to that their might shall make right, even they are subject to politics. As things stand now, both the United States and Canada are democracies, and this is just one of the problems that I opted not to drone on about a moment ago that make it very difficult for Alberta to be taken away and put in the United States. And it's local politics too. Because one of the reasons they have not already annexed Alberta is that even in right-wing conservative Alberta, it's still to the left of American politics, broadly speaking, and persistently so, by which I mean you won't have right to life laws and ban abortion. You will not have everybody carrying guns in any Alberta where people have a vote. In fact, what will inevitably happen, and people have studied this quite closely in Alberta, is if Trump comes with his army and says, knock down the door, we're taking Alberta. Oh, great. The Democrats would love that because there's 2 more Democratic senators. I mean, there's no scenario in which I don't think, not yet anyway, where the United States is going to take over Alberta and tell them, but you can't have any representatives in Congress. I don't think that will get very far. So now you've alienated
Terry, that's a very good point. But of course, the United States also controls Puerto Rico. So it will be a status not like a usual state. It might be something like Puerto Rico. But now I want to go to Ambassador Kapoor. Ambassador Kapoor, it's not just grabbing the territory, but it's also exploiting the natural resources, the mineral wealth and hydrocarbons and this and that. What do you envisage the focus on Arctic? That I want to have Greenland because Arctic belongs to us and China and Russia are right there north of Canada in the Northern Passageway. Do you envisage looking at the international situation right now? Will there be an attempt to take over Greenland and rest of the Arctic territories?
Well, the way it is playing out currently is that there may not be a physical takeover of Greenland, but it may lead to some sort of an agreement which will give a greater access, greater control to the American, interests in terms of American forces for security purposes, American interest for exploitation of the natural resources there. So that sort of structure may evolve. Because at some stage there was also some thinking that with about 57,000 Greenlanders, if they were to offer, $1 million each, it would only be an amount of 57 billion, and they would, sort of be swayed to join the US. So there's a lot of templates being worked out, but I don't know what will ultimately be the final outcome of all that. But one scenario is possibly this, that they may have much greater sway on the local aspects of Greenland and thereby be able to cope with the challenges posed by China and Russia in particular. But on the other hand, and it is also a very important question because the internal situation in America is also an important factor. Because if in November 2026, the Republicans lose some seats in the Congress and in the Senate, then the situation of the White House and the administration and the president himself becomes very precarious, as the president has been pointing out to his Republican senators and others that if they don't manage to retain control of the Senate and the Congress, House of Representatives, it'll be very difficult for them going ahead. He'll become a lame duck president. Now, about the exploitation of natural resources, that has also been going on for a long time by the US. And I've seen that in Chile, for example, when President Allende had nationalized the copper mines, they sort of overthrew him through a CIA initiative and put Pinochet in power. And with the understanding that Pinochet would denationalize those copper mines and give access to the Americans. But when they talked to Pinochet to denationalize, he refused to do that. He said that now that I'm in power, I see that you had been exploiting it all, and Chileans have not been getting any share of it in terms of all the copper coming out of Chile, and none of the profits flowing into Chile for any of their economic benefits or development. So he refused to do that. After a lot of negotiations and discussions, he finally agreed to issue new licenses whereby the American companies could come in and create new mines with investment, but with a fair share of distribution of the revenues from those new mines. Now, that was not very palatable to the Americans. They did that. But afterwards, we saw what happened with Pinochet, with the international summons against him, and he being arrested and humiliated, etc. So it's not that time. This Maduro episode has taken it to the extreme, of course. They had done that with Panama also earlier over different aspects and issues with Noriega. But here, they've taken away president of a sovereign country, violating all the norms of Westphalian systems and definitions of state and powers of state. So it's a new shift in terms of dealing with states and not saying that Venezuelan oil is our oil, Venezuelan energy is our energy, and we will decide on the revenue sort of sharing between US and Venezuela. So let's see how things shape up, because the opposition to that is also there. There are a lot of countries now speaking up. So it may not be an easy ride. And if China also decides to take over Taiwan, and the US is not able to control that, that will be another very significant sort of disaster for the world.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. Since there are no questions in the chat room, I'm going to ask a question from one of the audience members, and that audience member is Mr. Ankush Bhandari. He's a member of Board of Directors of Council for Strategic Affairs. So Ankush, please put your camera on because I am going to ask you the next question. Ankush, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Give me 1 second, sir.
Okay.
Are you able to see me now?
Actually, let me see. Well, we can hear you. I'm not sure whether we can see you or not, but let me ask you the question. Whenever a regional or superpower tries to overextend itself, there's only a limit. And we saw what happened to the USSR. That does not exist anymore. Do you think that US is falling into the same trap now? Do you envisage any possibility that there may be some implosion? There is talk about states like California seceding, and there's definitely a talk coming from Minnesota that we are going to join Canada. We are better off being part of Canada rather than United States. Now, you are based in US and you have been very closely watching the political events and you participate in that party political processes. What is your hunch? I mean, these are not mere talks. People are serious about it.
Yeah. See, thank you, first of all, Adityanjee, and thank you all the distinguished panels. I heard you very well. Just like we can say that California is going to separate from US, or Minnesota is going to join, it's not going to happen. And it will never happen, at least in my lifetime. That I can say. I don't know what happened afterwards, because every rise has a fall. Like India dominated the world for 1,000 years, British 200 years, America from last 150 years or so. But like Terry said, that Alberta is not going to go away and join uh, with the US. The same way Minnesota is not going to do that. If you have seen the Minnesota history, when Ronald Reagan won the election in 1980, 49 states go in his favor. It was only Minnesota which didn't voted for him. So this type of ideology is not new in Minnesota, and it has become a heaven for all the terror sponsor activities in US and the worldwide, I will say. If you remember a few days back, Ilan Omar has gone to Pakistan occupied Kashmir and said Kashmir is a part of Pakistan. She has nothing to do with India and Pakistan. It's better you stay in your turf than to poke your nose in other affairs. Coming back to your question on California, like Terry said that this is not going to happen. But when truckers did their strike, they were humiliated. Their bank balances were confiscated. Where that was the speech, freedom of speech at that time. On the other hand, if Khalistani does that, it's the freedom of speech. So you can't ride on a two boats and assume that you will reach the shore. No, you can't. It's practically impossible. California is very much sponsored by Joe Soros. In fact, I will say Joe Soros is sponsoring all the anti-elements activity, whether it's Mamdani. If you see now, the Epstein file has come out and it shows how Mamdani has been groomed since childhood to be an anti-American. So having said that, I don't think this is going to happen. Number first, yes, Trump policies are harsh, but they are pro-American. He has said in the United Nations in 2017, don't expect me to come with your begging bowl and expect that I will give you billions. Whose money is going outside of country? It's your and mine, sir. Not of the people who are living in America, who are living in India or Europe or Australia or somewhere else.
Thank you, Ankush. You have made your point very well. I may just remind our viewers that empires do fall, they do crumble. USSR did fall. We have seen cycles of Chinese empire crumbling historically several times. There are cycles. And I think the students of international relations and geopolitics need to understand that US will not be an exception to that. If you try to overextend, and if you're in debt of $38 trillion and you're trying to acquire other territories and countries, there will be some impact. Things may not be as usual. Nobody predicted that USSR will crumble like that suddenly. So that does happen, and we can just talk about it, but the possibilities are there. Nobody can discount it. Nobody can, sort of predict it. Things happen in a very unpredictable manner. Bottom line is that the old world order is gone. We are in a brave new world with spheres of, or brave new old world with sphere of influences defined. We are looking at some kind semblance of a G3, that I'll take over the Western Hemisphere. Putin, you can take over the Eastern Europe. Ukraine is already half of Ukraine is already yours. And we shall not say anything if Xi Jinping was to take Taiwan or some other islands over there. As long as we take all the territories, that's the new way the world is going to work, and we have to get used to it. My heartfelt thanks to Terry Milewski, Professor Anup Kumar, and Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. My thanks all to our audience member and to Ankush for joining in, because there were no questions in the chat room. And finally, Thanks to Team CSA, Ripudaman Pachori, and Rajiv Verma, who helped me behind the scenes to get these kind of, discussions possible. We shall be meeting again on the 4th Saturday in February, and we will be probably talking about the post-election Japan, what are going to be the strategic postures of Sane Takeichi government-led Japan in Northeast Asia. So there will be a distinguished lecture. I am letting you know. I'm not declaring the name of the speaker, but that shall come. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. As I said, this roundtable discussion has been live cast on YouTube. It will be available on our YouTube channel and on our website. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. It
Happy,
was nice meeting you, Terry, and Ambassador Kapoor and Mr. Bhandari. Thank you very
happy
much.
Valentine's Day to everybody.
It was fun talking to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.